In the last section, we saw the string attribute length, which returns the length of a string. We saw that the empty string has length 0, and we use this in Boolean comparisons. In this section, we'll look at the closely related idea of methods. And in fact, in Ruby, there's no fundamental distinction between the two. So for example, if there's a special Boolean method on strings that returns true if the string is empty and false otherwise. Let's take a look at it. It looks like this. In this case, the empty string dot empty question mark. This is very unusual. Most programming languages don't let you use punctuation in a method name like this. In general, a method is just a function attached to an object. We saw the putS function earlier that took in an argument and just printed it out. In this case, no argument is necessary. The only thing empty question mark has to know about is the string. So that's true. And this is false. It's worth noting here that we don't have to include anything like parentheses. So in lots of languages, attributes, also called properties, look like this, look like length. And then methods have opening and closing parentheses with the arguments, and even if there aren't any arguments, you still have to put them there. But in Ruby, you don't. You can. This works, but no one ever writes Ruby methods like this. Ruby methods only include parentheses if there are arguments, and even then they're optional. This empty method lets us rewrite some control flow in a way that reads more naturally as Ruby. So before we did something like this, we had x before. X was, what was it? Let's copy this. X was equal to foo, I believe, and y was equal to the empty string. And then we said this, but strings are empty, else at least one of the strings is non-empty because x.length isn't 0. This evaluates the second branch. A better way to write this in Ruby is like this. If x.length double equals 0 gets replaced with if x.empty. And y dot, actually I think control K works. There we go. And the same stuff. In general, there's a strong preference in Ruby to use these Boolean methods, which are indicated with this question mark, in place of comparisons if at all possible. In the language of object-oriented programming, objects respond to methods, and strings respond to a large variety of different methods, including some that transform the strings themselves. So for example, suppose we have an all caps word like this. Honey badger, don't care that it's all caps, but we're going to make it all lowercase. The way to do that in Ruby is with the downcase method. Remember, we don't need parentheses. This alone is sufficient. If you've studied JavaScript, compare this to the toLowercase method. In that case, we had to write it like this. I'll just write it as if this were JavaScript. The convention here would be to use camel case. Again, we'll talk about this later in the tutorial. And you'd have to use parentheses like this. But that doesn't work in Ruby because the languages are different. It's worth noting that the downcase method does not actually modify the string in any way. So for example, if we say this, animal equals honey badger, Animal.downcase is the lowercase version of honey badger, but animal is unchanged. So in other words, downcase doesn't mutate or change the value, it just transforms it and returns it. One situation where you might downcase a string is if you're standardizing on using, say, all lowercase for email usernames. Email addresses are case insensitive, but if you're, say, storing them in a database, you might want to ensure that they're all lowercase. So for example, let's say we defined first name, as in a previous section, that, and then we could say the username is going to be the downcase version of this. Like that. And then we could, say, interpolate this into an email address. Username at example.com. As you might be able to guess, we can actually go the other way as well. See if you can guess how to transform a string into the uppercase version of itself. Suppose we wanted the all caps version, or the uppercase version of last name here. Well, downcase here, downcase is it, upcase is it. This is a good sign of growing technical sophistication if you can start to guess things like these patterns between different methods. It's amazing how far you can get once you understand the basic internal logic of the naming system in the language. There are tons of other string methods. We don't have time to cover them all, but we don't have to because there's great documentation. So let me show you here a quick Google search. This is Ruby string methods. And so this gives us RubyDoc here. And now it says Ruby 2.4.0. I'm using 2.5. It actually doesn't matter for the kinds of methods we're going to be looking at, but it's a good idea to edit this address bar to get the exact version that you're using if you think there's any chance that there might be some sort of discrepancy. So scrolling down here, we can see there are lots of methods. We can search on the page. Here's empty question mark. We saw that before. So let's take a look at include. Include question mark. So we can see here that this returns true if the string contains the given string or character. So we can just copy this here. Hello.include question mark LO. So this asks Ruby the question, does the string hello include the substring LO? And the answer is true. It does. You can see how much flexibility there is here. So for example, there's a method called index. The examples here use parentheses, whereas the examples here do not. In this context, I would almost certainly use parentheses if I were writing this for my own code. But it works either way. You can see here, it does not include OL. And then I actually learned something making this tutorial. I didn't know you could do this. Hello.include question H. What is that? It's true. So what is this? Turns out that's just the character H. I literally did not know that. I've been programming Ruby for a long time. I did not know that until I read this tutorial. So you learn something every day. The documentation is a great source of new information. If you ever want to do something with an object, a string, or any of the other objects we'll be learning about, it's a good idea to go to the documentation and see if there's something already built in. The chances are pretty good there is. Just to reinforce the kind of notation that I prefer, let's take a look at a more extended example here. We'll look at a longer string. This is a fragment from a famous soliloquy from Shakespeare's Hamlet. So does that include question mark, argument, the substring to be? Does. What about question? Yep. What about? Sure seems like that's not there. What about this? What about all caps to be? It's false. So this sort of include really does look at every character literally. Capital characters are different from lowercase, so the comparison here is case sensitive. So these are just a few examples of the kinds of functions attached to objects, that is to say, methods, that string objects, or specifically, as we'll see later in this tutorial, what are known as instances of string, or string instances, respond to. And we've also seen how to use the documentation to learn more about how to use that variety of methods.